welcome
Okay.
everybody.
Yes.
We're here to celebrate Colleen and her growth throughout the year in the month of November. She's going to share some.
Yes. So thank you all for coming. This will be about 20 minutes of presentation and then about 10 to 15 of questions if you guys have any questions for me at the end. So I first want to start to talk about what brought me to teaching. And I've always had a love of French. I've studied French for a long time, since I was in middle school. And I got a chance to travel to France when I graduated high school. And in college, I studied French at Kalamazoo College. And I also lived in France and went to the École Supérieure du Commerce, so a French business school in Clermont-Ferrand. And this is a photo from the view out my bedroom window. I don't know if you can see the little rainbow. It was a good day. And then this is the school that I went to, and that's a picture from the trip that I visited. So, welcome, Ron. So that's what, oh, yeah, actually, yeah, we could do that. Yeah, is it bright enough to see? Oh, that's good. Okay, so you can see the beautiful rainbow. That's what I got to look at every day. So that's what brought me to teaching French, but I want to talk a little bit more briefly about what brought me to teaching in general. And most of you in this room know that my history as a circus performer has severely influenced my career pathway to becoming a teacher. Starting out as a performer and training, I slowly kind of shifted into teaching circus arts. So learning to teach these things I was passionate about to other people, having a shared experience, kids, adults alike, even teaching a PE class at Kalamazoo College during my last year there. And this is a photo from a camp that I taught, and this is a photo from that college PE class doing some partner acrobatics with students. So some of the things that enthralled me about circus arts, I was thinking deeply, why do I like circus and why do I like language? And circus for me is about expression and creativity, storytelling. It's interdisciplinary, it's non-competitive, call it an athletic art. And you can use performance as a social commentary, and you can create shared experiences for everyone involved. And as a language teacher this year, I've become very familiar with the 5 C's of language learning, and I found some very interesting parallels between my experience with circus and what the American Council for Teaching Foreign Languages describes as the 5 C's of world language learning. So expression translates to communication. Storytelling helps us communicate about culture. Interdisciplinary art is the connections that we see when we learn language between different things. And then performance is social commentary. We compare things using language when we learn language. And then creating shared experiences is a way of developing community. So just as circus is a medium, language also is a medium for doing these things. So a little bit about what I've been doing for the past year. Student teaching at Pioneer High School in Ann Arbor. The enrollment is about 1,500 students. 35% are minority, and they're one of 6 high schools in Ann Arbor. This is one of the big public schools of Ann Arbor. And they got a silver medal ranking by the U.S. News and World Report back in 2010. And this year at the school was an interesting time to be there because there was a lot of changes in the administration. There was a new principal, there were interim administrators, and a lot of new policies changing within the school. So it was a very interesting time to be there. Shelley was also placed there, so she knows a lot about those changes and how it affected the work environment and the educational environment for the students. So my class, this is a picture of the classroom that I was teaching in all year. You can see that the desks are arranged in pods, and this is to kind of foster that communication and learning French together. And helping one another to learn French is one of the main goals of French 3, which was where I was teaching. And then you can see some of the visuals that we have around the classroom. maps and art. And that's a picture of my mentor teacher, Ellen Karpiak. She couldn't be here today. Her dog is very ill, so hopefully everything is going okay. But so that's pretty much what the background of what this year has been like. And now I just want to talk a little bit about sort of my philosophy of teaching, and I'm going to frame it with a quote from a book that I read with my students, a French novel this year. And the quote is, "On ne voit bien qu'avec le cœur, l'essentiel est invisible pour les yeux." And in English, it's, "One only sees properly with the heart, the essential is invisible to the eyes." And this was from The Little Prince. Most of you probably know this book. It's a really famous French novel written in the 1960s. And to talk about the essential pieces of my philosophy, I think that so much of good teaching is being a keen observer and being able to react to any situation that you come across, and being able to notice those things through your senses, but also those things that you might just feel instinctively. And this year, for all of us Mackers, it's been a lot about theory, and it's been a lot about best practices, and a whole lot of information, methods, courses, and everything. And something I learned to do this year was to be reflective and actually trust my gut instinct every once in a while. Because once you've developed those skills, really the base of those skills is being able to trust your instinct and your observational skills for students. So some of the main points of my philosophy are about being adaptable, so listening to student feedback and adjusting. Being very clear and inclusive in both demeanor and language. Enjoying the process of it so that students also will, because they pick up on it naturally. And guiding students to make meaning through context. I think this is really important for language learning especially, is to give the language context, to not just be learning some discrete point, but to have it be purposeful and have it be relevant. Also to model lifelong learning, so telling the students some of the things I've learned in the MAC program about education and things I'm developing kind of shows them that we're always learning and we're never done. And I think of becoming an effective teacher as a process. It's not something we're ever done with. And I've just started it this year. So, and then lastly, bringing it back to my Petit Prince theme, looking for the invisible and the intangibles, being able to reflect, adapt, and improve constantly. So, moving on to the MAC standards for effective teaching, I'd like to show a couple artifacts from the past year. And the two standards that I'm going to focus on are assessment and instruction. So the Mackers are really familiar with this, but under each of the benchmarks, or under each of the standards, there are benchmarks that we try to address and work on as part of our teaching practice. So these are some of the ones for assessment. And I won't read them all off, but those are general things about assessment, and I'll sort of address these as I talk about the next few artifacts. The first one is about an integrative assessment that I did with students near the beginning of the year. It was in January when we first started taking over the classroom. So this is about a trip in a time machine, and the students were to describe what they will bring in this time machine using the future tense, and then bringing these props into the classroom to present, practicing the language, doing presentational communication, and really using this grammar concept in context. And one thing that I was surprised at was when you ask students to be creative, they will surprise you. So that's an astronaut helmet. So I don't know exactly what the proper term is, but yeah, that was one of the props. Somebody needed a space helmet to be able to go in a time machine. So another assessment that I wanted to show you was something called Vraiment Français, so real world French. And this actually emerged from a collaboration with a Spanish teacher in the MAC program. And she had found one for Spanish, shared it with me, and then I altered it to make it about French so that my students could experience French outside the classroom in a way that was relevant to them and interesting to their lives. So I don't know if it's big enough for you to read, but there are a lot of different options for students to pick. They had to do 2 of them, and they had to be able to present them to the class and give evidence for what they did. For example, if they went to a French restaurant, they would have to take a picture of them with their food, maybe the menu, explain what they got. And I think what's really nice about this assessment is it puts the learning in the hands of the students. And when students have a choice to pick what they want to learn, they're going to be immediately more engaged than if I were to just direct them onto what to do. So here are a couple of examples of what students did. So changing their phones over to French. A lot of them complained that they didn't know how to change their settings and that their keyboards were all different because the order of the letters on the French keyboard, I bet it's the same for Spanish, it's shuffled. And this is one of my students who went to What Crêpe, a new French restaurant in Ann Arbor. So, and there was also a choice to do whatever you want with permission of the teachers. And I'll show a short clip of something one of my students asked if she could do for this project. Again, surprising with the creativity. I don't know how loud this is going to be.
Pour cette recette, on a besoin d'un œuf, 2 cuillères à soupe de lait, 2 cuillères à soupe de l'huile d'olive, 4 cuillères à café de sucre et 4 cuillères à café de vanille. D'abord, on mélange les œufs.
This is the best part.
Ensuite, on ajoute le lait, l'huile d'olive, le sucre et la vanille. On les mélange jusqu'à ce qu'il est lisse.
Okay, so you get the idea. It goes on for a few more minutes, but I'll spare you the stirring and looking. So this was one example of something a student was really passionate about cooking, and she wanted to do her little Julia Childs inspired cooking video for making crêpe. So that was something that was really exciting to see a student choose to do something that was a little more unique and really put some time in extra that she didn't have to, but she was interested in and it engaged her, so she did it. So this is some feedback. I just did an end of the year survey with my students, and one of the things that students commented on was one activity that they enjoyed or what it taught them. And we had overwhelming responses about the Vraiment Français project. And one of the reasons for it is that the students were forced to use French outside of the French classroom, but it allowed them to decide how to do it. It helped me review and use French that I learned, and I learned some new French also. So really that choice factor is something that made a big difference for students, and I know that's something I'm going to keep working on as I continue being a member of this profession. So moving on to the third standard, or the second one I'm going to talk about for today, is instruction. And these are the benchmarks that kind of go along with it. And so this year I experimented with a lot of different things, from methods classes we learned, from things I picked up with my mentor, from things I talked about with my colleagues here. And one thing that really stood out to me as an asset for a world language classroom is leveraging authentic text. So being able to use original text in that language in ways that are interesting to students and relevant to the class really enhances the learning environment, in my opinion. And it's a window for culture. It's a window for authentic culture. One thing we learned in our methods class was alter the task, not the text. So the more we can keep students engaged with an authentic text, and text can be broadly defined as video, audio, actual texts. A lot of things can be considered a text in this context. But if we can expose them to those things, it's a window for culture and an opportunity to really experience language in its full, true form. Oh, and then, so we started reading Petit Prince, the Little Prince, at the beginning of the year. And students read in small groups, kind of going through translating, reading for enjoyment. So there's lots of ways to read. Reading for enjoyment, reading to learn, reading for comprehension, reading for other ways of understanding. So really it matters as a teacher when I'm presenting a student with a text, what is the goal in mind and what do I want them to read for? And so we got some feedback about the way that reading in small groups and never discussing and kind of translating some of the passages was going for students. And so I paused and had a discussion with students about how we could make this better. And here are some of the suggestions that they came up with. This is notes from our discussion. So all the highlighted things are actually things that we started doing after this discussion. And this was back in February. So to make it a little bit more clear. I used a graphic organizer to help students identify symbolism in the book. So this was a really valuable activity for them to really start to get to a point of analysis, going a little bit higher in Bloom's taxonomy, being able to interact with the text on a deeper level than they were before. We also used chapter chunking, group teaching. So I designed about 5 chapters where students would learn the chapter and then teach it to the rest of the class in a small group. And this was one of the other activities students pointed out and said was really useful. Being able to present and have to teach something made it so they learned it even better. We also had vocabulary supports, class discussions in English every once in a while to clear things up. And I think that really supported them and helped them feel more comfortable with the text if they were confused about certain parts, to be able to really talk through it. And then I made some comprehension questions and information gap activities, so kind of fill in the blank to identify essential components of the chapter so that they could better understand it. And then I tried to connect it to some more fun, interactive things like video. There's a French, like a Broadway-style musical of The Little Prince, and the students got a real kick out of listening to some of these actors sing out scenes that they had just read in class. So that was something they enjoyed. And then there's a little TV show, an animation show. And I also had them listen to native speakers reading chapters to them as another way to interact with this text. So these are some of the responses about why students thought I might be a good teacher. And all these things focus on the feedback that I get from students and how I alter my practice accordingly. So being able to say, she was open to new ideas on how to teach and asked individually how I am in school, which not many teachers do at all. And that these were all anonymous surveys, so I have no idea who said what of these, but it was really nice to kind of get that feedback, knowing you just don't do one thing that you think is best, you listen to us and try new things, and realizing a certain lesson doesn't work and try new approaches. So this is at the core of my philosophy, is being able to reflect, adapt, take in feedback, and constantly improve. And it seems to resonate with students that I'm willing to do that, and I think that makes me on my way to being an effective teacher. So a couple of other things related to instructional methods that I just want to briefly mention that I did this year. Trying to expose students to authentic culture through authentic text is one thing that we did, but also connecting them to real-world events that are happening now in Francophone countries that aren't necessarily France. So students did a project on Mali where they got to write their own article or draw a political cartoon. And we used Google Drive to actually compose these things so I could give students feedback and then they could do their edits. So it was all virtual, and it was a really cool way to introduce students to a new piece of technology that could really enhance the timing for feedback and give them something they could be proud of. So this is actually embedded. It says c'est à vous de le faire maintenant. It's your turn to do it now. So it's talking about France coming in to help Mali, and now France saying, it's your turn, take over. And so it was a nice way to give feedback, and I thought that was a really cool thing to try this year for an instructional method. And then the last thing that I want to talk about that I made this year as a piece of my instruction is the website. Being able to communicate both with parents and students through this website, keep track of notes, assignments, anything really related to the class, resources. That's the thing that I've developed the most on this site and I plan to use in the future. Being able to keep track of everything and have it be a really good thing for students to go back to. And then this is really just an effort to be open and to communicate and give students another way to find information. So if we can provide multiple ways to interact with information, it can help students be more successful in class. So, and it also made expectations clear and visible. That's a really important part of a class website. So to wrap it up, I just want to kind of rehash some of the things that we talked about. Adaptability and reflective teaching at the heart of my practice. Being able to leverage authentic text in the world language classroom. Providing opportunities for choice in the classroom. Using technology appropriately. And then promoting lifelong learning. So those are the things that I have learned this year. And that is all for my presentation. So, thank you. So, yeah, pas de quoi. I changed it. See, it's more professional now. But I do want to say thank you for everyone for coming, family and everybody. So, what kind of questions do you have? Yeah, John.
One thing I was curious about is you seem to know your students on an individual level. How do you connect non-dominant cultures to like French culture? Instead of like maybe in American culture, do you focus on any like maybe non-dominant cultures within that? Just know like how do you do that?
Yeah, so if you think about the other Francophone nations in the world besides France, I think this is what you're asking. So Northern Africa is where a lot of those countries are found, and Mali's in that region. And being able to integrate authentic texts and news articles from those regions is a really important way. Showing films, making students aware that France is not the only place where French is spoken. And being able to talk about the history behind that, the roots of colonialism in Northern Africa by the French. I think there's a lot of opportunity to talk about the non-dominant cultures, but in the Francophone world, and then Canada too. Yeah.
I had no idea how you would have connected your desire to teach circus skills to and transition that into the desire to teach French. I had no idea that you could have linked those two as clearly as you did. I had no idea how you jumped from one to the other, and so it was very enlightening, at least for me, to learn how those two things were connected. I didn't see any connection at all, and now I clearly see a connection.
Finally.
Especially using the 5 C's of circus components.
Yeah.
The 5 C's of world language components that, well, 3 of us are familiar with, 4 of us are familiar with, and I thought that was brilliant.
That was something I discovered this spring when I was thinking, wait a second, why do I like these two things? They gotta have something in common. And then it came together.
I have a question.
Yeah.
We all know the restrictions and limitations of being a student teacher. Some of us are given a little more freedom than others. I have a question. Without, well, we know the restrictions and limitations. What are you excited about doing next year that you felt perhaps you were held back from doing this year?
I'm really excited to teach in close to or complete immersion. Using French with the students was something that I tried to do a lot this year because they were year 3 students. And based on the way their previous French education had been, that wasn't something they were conditioned to. So being able to speak only in French with students but provide supports so that they understand, whether that's written instructions in English or asking a student to re-explain something in English after I've said it in French. Those are all strategies to use to make sure you can use as much of the language in the class as possible but still ensure comprehension. And I'm really excited to be able to do that a little bit more fully next year in an immersion setting. Yeah. Yeah. Alex.
I just want to say congratulations.
Oh.
You did a really good job.
Thanks, Alex. Thank you.
Nice shirt, was appropriate.
Yeah, he wore a French shirt. Okay, thanks. Bye.
Can I follow up on that
Yeah.
question? I'm thinking about, like I told you that I had done the Spanish immersion at Middlebury.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if you think that if you do immersion in a school, you're restricted in how much you can do that because of standards and various things.
I think it depends on the school. So where I will be next year, it's immersion. I think if in a public school setting, I think it's much more encouraged to use some English. And I think I agree with using English to some extent to really explain grammar concepts and to be able to teach students English grammar alongside a world language grammar. I think that's really valuable and that might actually be missed in some of their earlier education. So, I mean, I guess I would have to tailor my instruction to whatever the school or the district that I was in sort of required, but at the same time maximize the amount of French I could speak with students. Yeah. Yeah, Preston.
Yeah, kind of following up on what you would do or will be able to do that you weren't as a student teacher. I want to preface it by saying that those of us in your world language cohort are very well aware that you weren't a student teacher. And I'm interested to know what, what distinguishes you from the run-of-the-mill teachers. I noticed some of your students said you tried new ideas, you had new ideas on how to teach them. What distinguishes you from conventional French language pedagogy?
From a pedagogical standpoint, rather than like the way I interact with students or that kind of stuff?
Globally, like,
Okay.
just anything that makes you stand out.
Okay, I think that I can connect with students personally on a really full and deep level. And I think that when students like their teachers or when students respect their teachers, they learn more from them. And I think that can help me be very effective. I think that I try to integrate a vast variety of French culture in what I'm teaching in Francophone culture. And I think not being so France-centered is a strong asset to a French teacher because I know the way that I learned French was not incredibly that broad. It was more France-focused. And I think that may have been typical of the time I went to school, or maybe that's just tradition. But I think that those things do give me an edge. And the idea that I'm willing to continually learn, to learn new things so that I can teach those things to my students, is an exciting way to approach it too.
Well, let me follow up actually on that, because you talk about differentiation in terms of the curriculum, including the Francophone world, which I applaud. One of my chief concerns is differentiation in instruction and individualizing instruction to students who are underperforming, that have poor self-efficacy in French or in bad poor self-confidence as students. And I guess I'm wondering if you can tell us about one or two students that you did have at your placement that you felt you influenced positively in terms of their self-efficacy, their self-confidence, their performance academically.
I've talked about my USA hockey player a few times, and I think he's going to come back into this conversation. And I think I've even told you guys about him too. So I have a student who's a USA hockey player and not very motivated academically and struggles in school, and I think he might actually have some cognitive processing issues in terms of like the speed of his processing. And being able to work with him one-on-one during lunch a few times he's come in, and being able to see that success. Actually, he got a B on his quiz, and he gave me a high five. He was so excited. He's like, this is the best grade I ever got on a quiz in French, and he was just overjoyed. So seeing something like that happen, knowing that like I opened the door to him to say, hey, come in, get some extra help. He put in the time, I put in the effort. We both showed up, and then something good came of it, is something that I think is a real positive way to scaffold a student who's struggling, is giving that one-on-one attention. Yeah, Shelley.
So we'll start with praise. I like your presentation, because I know I was with you when you were working on it a little bit. I think you did a good job with the PowerPoint. It was easy to follow, not too much text, a nice mix of graphics, so that was well differentiated in terms of audience needs. So to kind of a follow-up question with what Preston asked, so in terms of self-efficacy, how do you relate your own language learning experiences and your studies abroad to your students' language learning experiences? Do you take some of the challenges that you've encountered and help them with their learning process? Because I know when I've gotten to teach Italian, I look for patterns, but nobody taught me to look for that. And so I bring that to my teaching. So how do you take what you have experienced personally to inform your instruction?
Yeah, so little things that I've sort of figured out along the way, things like patterns. I certainly try to teach to my students mnemonic devices, weird things I think of that make it easier to remember things, is one way that I can help them. Another thing is that for my students who aren't native speakers of English, I kind of understand the way it feels for them to be learning another language in another language, because I did that when I was in France. I took an Italian class completely in French, so it's a few years ago, but I still remember what it's like to be a new language learner and to be a language learner in a language that is not your native language. And I think that gives me an edge of understanding and being able to like have some compassion for how hard it is. And sort of know what they're going through. So I've told that story to some of my students who I know have been speaking English for 3 years, and they're like, what? Oh my gosh, okay. Like, then I have a credibility with them, and they can, feel free to talk to me about how it's going, and so yeah, that's something I can offer my students from my personal experience. Yeah.
Colleen, do you have a different approach to students in the classroom who have a less auditory ability and maybe they're better with text? I know when you were trying to, Colleen was trying to help me learn some basic French words when we were going to go on a trip. And she would say something to me and then say, répétez s'il vous plaît, or whatever. and then I would try and say it back. And she would look at me and say, Mom, do you realize what came out of your mouth is in no way resembles what I just said to you? Because I don't, I'm not good with music either. I can't hear and replicate a sound. I might be able to sing along with the radio, but you turn it off and what comes out doesn't sound anything like the song. And I'm sure you must have students who are not as good, can't hear as good what you're trying to teach them, but maybe they're better at text or some other way.
Well,
do you approach them differently?
I still focus on pronunciation actually, and something I learned this year from my phonetics class is like the anatomy of the mouth and things you can tell people to do with their tongue or with how open their mouth is or how their lips are formed to actually make the sounds sound right. And so I've learned a few exercises that I've tried with students, and like getting the French R is a really hard sound to make because we don't have it in English, but there's a sequence of exercises you can have students do to practice it and to get to a point, okay, now have your mouth like this and say E, okay? Now say U. Yeah, so there's like different ways to practice it. And I think recognizing if students have a thing that's more challenging to them, being able to talk to them about it and say, okay, here's a plan, here's how we're going to work on it together. Rather than just avoiding it or providing a different support. But I would also provide those supports, naturally. So.
I have a question about technology.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like all the different things that you want to do with like whether it's podcasts or various things, it seems like technology can have a role in your classroom or does have a role in your classroom beyond the teacher should. So could you talk a little bit about how you integrate technology into French language?
Yeah. Well, the most basic way, like I showed, was the website, being able to collaborate through Google Drive. Another thing I've done with students is using Google Voice for speaking practice. So I can have students call a phone number, leave a voicemail, and I can give them written feedback and also send them an MP3 of their recording so they can hear it. And that's that instant feedback where they can actually hear what they said and improve from there based on the comments. And I think technology is great in classrooms if we use it in mindful ways and if we use it in ways that support the learning goals. If we're using it just as a gimmick or just as a way to kill time or have some like flash to the classroom, I don't think it's as effective. It really needs to be used in a mindful way that supports the learning rather than it's just this additional thing. So I definitely see myself exploring new technologies, but also carefully evaluating which ones to integrate in my classroom to the benefit of the students. Okay.
All right, so this is what you said.
Uh-oh.
You said the teacher is being a human servant and noticing your sensitivity intuitively and trust your gut instinct.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I get that. But how would you talk with somebody about that in this class? I mean, it's not as big an issue for you where you're going to be teaching.
Okay.
But if you were teaching someplace else, how would you, if you were trusting your gut around something, how would you articulate an argument to somebody who's looking for evidence where they might not think gut is evidence?
Okay.
Do you know what
I'm having a hard time imagining this situation, but I would be able to find evidence. I'd be able to kind of back up, why am I feeling this way? What am I noticing about something I can tell people? What can we see here? What can we... So I would start asking myself those kinds of questions to see what, why my gut might be telling me this thing. And then I'd try to gather more information, obviously, to be able to support something. Like if I'm imagining if I had a student who was having a lot of issues at home, I was imagining, or that there might have been an abusive situation or something, I would really try to observe even more carefully and maybe talk to the student, find a way to get more information to support a gut feeling that I might have had. Yeah. And then explain that to the person I need to talk to about it.
So maybe it's less an issue of trusting that one's gut is being in tune with gut instincts.
Yeah.
And it I could do something about it. Because I think gut instincts, I mean, they save people's lives sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you just like trust your gut, and you're just like, ooh. But then you could probably unpack it, like you're saying, like what were the things that I noticed that
What
caused
triggered,
you to do
yeah.
that? But that's not the initial thing that you're doing. You're not saying, oh, I noticed these things, and now
Yeah.
it's like a response first. But in the very, data and evidence, people, they poo-poo
Yeah.
this. But it's a valuable source of information, so I just thought to
Yeah.
use that.
And I think it's kind of controversial for me to say that trust your gut in this program.
Right, this
Be-
is what I'm saying.
because this is like a little, flipping it, 360. But yeah, being able to recognize that, I think learning all these standards and learning all these best practices and learning all this stuff, we're so full of all these skills and knowledge. And now, how do we actually use them? There's something underneath that before we're even able to use them. And I kind of realized that this spring, to not get too tied up in such concrete pieces of education, even though they're there for us and they work.
In response to that, Colleen said that she learned to be reflective, and then there was this balance between being reflective and trusting her gut skills. And then about 3 minutes later, I heard that she gave a little bit of evidence of that by saying the pattern of reflect, and I was picturing her getting reflection on something that she did because her gut told her to do it, but then she always asked for feedback, adapted her practice, and improved her practice. And so I think it was more than just that what she did was more than just trust her gut feeling. She added this layer of pedagogy that reflected on her gut, asked for feedback, often on her gut feeling, and then adapted and improved. So,
Well, see, I was going from what she said, and I didn't make the link, though I could have done that, but I did not. Because I really, because personally, I do think that that matters. And I think that people should do that. So I'm not disagreeing with you, and I am in this program. But I do think that if you say that, then that there would need to be an explicit link to what you said. Because I will always say, I'm not going to infer. That's why I tell them, I'm not inferring. You need to tell me what you're trying to say, because then I know. But I think you handled it.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Okay.
First off, one quick question. If you could go back to September, what is one thing you would do differently?
Would study and memorize every student's name the first night or the second night so that I could say their names the next day and start to make that personal connection immediately. Because as a student teacher, being there only 2 days a week was really hard to make those connections with students. And then I'd be there on a Thursday, I wouldn't see them again until Tuesday, and I'd forget people's names. So I think if I'd had a list of all their names and I studied it, I think that would have helped me forge those relationships a little sooner than I did. Because I really started to get to know my students probably in November is when I really started to get to know them.
Isn't that a little bit earlier too? Although
It is early, but yeah, it took me a few months, and I think that was something that I should have emphasized more, and I will certainly do that next year.
I will send you a video by Jim Quick. It
Okay.
gives you a strategy for remembering names and things.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? All righty then. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, guys. Thank you.